Shalom Uvracha. This evening we are privileged to study together the Torah section of this week, Parashat Va'era. The study this evening is dedicated in memory of an individual who, according to what someone just passed me a note, was following for a very long time the videos each week. Unfortunately, he's no longer living in this world. May God bless his soul. His name is Natan Eliyahu ben Devorah, and we hope that his whole family should be consoled immediately, and that he should be amongst those who are revived with our deep felt connection and belief in Tchiyat HaMetim.
Amen.
I'd like to study this evening, since we're studying in the Torah section of Va'era, all about the suffering of the Jewish people in Egypt. In these sections of study about how the Egyptians tormented the Jews, we read about it last week, and we continue to read about the continuation of Lo Shame'u el Moshe mikotze ruach u'me'avodah kasha. We read in this week's Torah section the Jews were really suffering. The Jews were really going through such intense difficulties. And there's a beautiful, beautiful introduction by a great teacher, one of the greatest Torah teachers of our generation. Her name is Professor Nechama Leibowitz, Aleha Shalom. I had the privilege of studying under her tutelage for a short while. And in her introduction to her commentary on the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, I believe it's available also in translation, she points out the many benefits from the experience that we went through as suffering slaves in Egypt. You see, the general focus of people learning these sections is that we study about how God took us out of Egypt, how we were able to emerge as a nation, how we ultimately were freed from the bondage of slavery, how the Egyptians were punished. Many lessons. But she focuses, and I recommend that each person read it if you have a chance, because it's really very, I think, very beautiful, very significant. She focuses on the benefits that we gained as a nation by going through these negative experiences. And this perhaps can shed light on any negative experience that any person goes through in the world. I hope that everyone only has positive, happy, joyous, and a life filled with celebrations and only good tidings.
Amen.
But in the past, when people did go through difficulties, maybe the way Professor Nechama teaches us to study the Torah section, maybe that's the way we should view any difficulty that we have. And one of the things she says is that the Jewish nation became sensitized forever to the suffering, to the plight of anyone who was going through difficulty. Because we went through all of it ourselves, so any stranger, whoever was put in the position of difficulty, the Torah constantly reminds us, you know what it was like. You remember, you have the collective national memory, right? So the Jewish people, why is it that the Jews are so sensitive to suffering? Precisely because we are a product of suffering. Precisely because we went through the suffering ourselves. And she has a long list here of, for instance, I'm reading here, chapter 22 of Shemot. V'ger lo toneh v'lo tilchatzenu. Don't oppress strangers. Don't oppress converts. Don't oppress newcomers. Ki geirim heitem beretz Mitzrayim. You know what it feels like. Remember when you were strangers in Egypt? Now this teaching would be significant in and of itself, even if we were never strangers in Egypt. But the fact that we all went through this experience together, millions of Jews, Ki geirim heitem beretz Mitzrayim, helped us and helps us till today understand and empathize and do something about the difficulty of all the Gerim in the world. All strangers are treated with greater levels of love, with greater levels of of sensitivity. Ki geirim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. Or in the 23rd chapter of Exodus. V'ger lo tilchatz. Don't oppress strangers. V'atem yidatem et nefesh hager. Beautiful, beautiful Torah language. V'atem yidatem et nefesh hager. You understand the nature of someone who's a newcomer. You understand the nefesh. You understand the soul. You understand the feeling. You understand the inner making of a ger. Remember when you went through that as a nation? So take that experience and do something with it. Don't just study history. Don't just read the texts in Parshat Va'era and the surrounding Torah sections. Oh yeah, well, once upon a time this happened. So what if it happened? What does it do for you? Or when it speaks about on holidays in the 16th chapter of Deuteronomy, in Devarim Perek Tet Zayin, it speaks about how when you celebrate your holidays, you can't just celebrate all by yourself. You can't just shut out the suffering people from the world, from your particular family celebration. You have to be inclusive. And the Torah says, not only should you include these strangers, not only should you include the people who are going through difficulty. The Torah says, okay, you're welcome to celebrate you and your family. V'hager, v'hayatom, v'halmana asher b'kirbecha. Make sure you include in your celebration all of the strangers, all of the orphans, all of the widows. V'zacharta ki eved hayita b'Mitzrayim. Do you remember? Do you remember what it was like when you were a slave in Egypt? Do you remember what it was like when you went through difficulty? How would you have felt if someone included you in their celebration? Maybe the Jewish nation suffered so because there was no one fulfilling this concept of celebrating together with the suffering people. Even on Shabbat, when it speaks about certain kinds of labor, that it's prohibited to use servants or maids. In the book of Deuteronomy, one of the reasons that's stated, or one of the concepts that's imparted regarding Shabbat is Leman yanuach avdecha v'amatcha kamocha. On Shabbat, you have to free your servants, your maids, your attendants from certain forms of labor. Why? So that they too should have a Shabbat. Leman yanuach avdecha v'amatcha kamocha. Adds the Torah, and what should you remember? What are you supposed to remember when you're doing this? V'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim. Do you remember? You were slaves in Egypt. So now someone is working for you. Do you remember? Do you remember what it was like? Or there's a concept when you free a worker. A worker's been working for you for many years. A worker's been working for you for many years. You're supposed to be sensitive. You're supposed to be sensitive. She points out that the word parech, the word befarech, only exists twice. Only exists twice in contextual references, in two different discussions in the Torah. Parech means, back-breaking labor, very difficult tasks. Vayavidu Mitzrayim et bnei Yisrael beparech. Et kol avodatam asher avdu b'hem beparech. They tortured them with such difficult work. They abused the Jews. They took advantage of them, and they enslaved them with such cruelty. Says Professor Leibowitz in the 25th chapter. When it speaks in the 25th chapter of the book of Vayikra, when it speaks about people who are working for you, even people who have lower status than maybe other people, even people who perhaps you think you can do whatever you want with them, it's interesting that the Torah speaks the very word that's used, of in the context of Egypt is used regarding how you should treat a slave. Lo tirdebo be. Anyone?
Yeah.
Beparech. Lo tirdebo beparech. You can't You can't demand of them. You can't demand of them certain forms of labor. Difficult, hard labor. Show sensitivity, show an understanding of God. It means remember the parach of Mitzrayim, and then you'll treat people differently. All the people who are working for you, you'll never cause them unnecessary suffering. And the gifts that you have to give laborers. There's a whole concept in the Torah of something called mitzvat ha'anaka. Hey, ayinun kuf. Hey, ha'anaka. Severance pay. You know, the concept of severance pay is based on Deuteronomy, chapter 15. So someone who's working for you for a long time, it says, give them gifts when they leave. Don't just free them from your ha'anek, ta'anik lo mitzoncha, migarnecha, mikvecha. Remember, v'zacharta, ki eved ha'ita beretz Mitzrayim, v'yiftecha Hashem Elokecha. Remember what it was like when you worked? Remember how God took you out of Egypt? Remember how you left Egypt? And that's the way you should help everyone be freed from their own Egypt. So, I think in essence what she's teaching us, in essence what the Torah is saying to us is, if we did indeed go through the difficulty of Egypt, and God did take us out of Egypt, then we're supposed to take everybody out of Egypt. All the people in Egypt, anybody you ever meet who's in Egypt, and whatever Egypt means in their particular case, take them out, and use the collective Egypt experience of the Jewish people, the slavery in Egypt, and the freedom from Egypt, to understand the difficulty of the slavery, and to bring each person his or her ultimate levels of freedom, just as God did to us when we were suffering in Egypt. May the lessons and studies of Parashat Va'era, the studies of the Jewish people suffering in Egypt, may this be the catalyst to remove all suffering from the Jewish people and from the whole world. Amen. May they all be redeemed. This very evening. Thank you so much for listening. Misha Berach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov. Moshe Aaron David Shalom. V'yivarech Yirapeh v'yichazek v'yitzar v'yishmor et Yirmiyahu ben Pri ben Nachama. Elna Rafan Allah Kadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachmim Allah. Lachim Mola Rapato Lachzikol Lachyotel. Shlach Lo Meir Refuah Shem Hashemayim Ramach V'Rav Shtagdav. Tov Shach Lo Yisrael Fat Nefesh V'Rat Haguf. Hashem Agol Zman Kriv and Amar Amen.
Oh man!
Thank you so much. We have a minyan. Chatan is like Domel Mel. You go anywhere you want. Break up minyans. It doesn't matter. Whatever. You need a minyan to get married. You know. Hashem should bless you. Hashem should bless you. Amen. It's an honor to meet you, Kala. Michael, can you stay for my rib? Can you stay for my rib?